I am Pete Davis. I'm a 3L here at the law school, and are we getting an echo on this? Is this a weird tinny sound? So no, it's working out? Okay. I'm a 3L here at the law school and the chair of the Harvard Law Forum, America's longest running law school speaker series. In my time here, we've had about a dozen speakers, and we're going to have about a dozen more coming this semester. But I'm going to be honest, and I hope the other speakers don't hear this, or maybe they do. It's the truth. This Harvard Law Forum event is the nearest and dearest to my heart. For 37 years, think about that, 37 years, Sister Helen Prejean has been ministering firsthand within our nation's system of state killing, working tirelessly day in and day out to steadfastly assert the dignity of all people and awaken the hearts and minds of her fellow citizens to the inhumanity of the death penalty. In 1993, she published Dead Man Walking, her best-selling story of her relationship with inmates on death row and her own journey of grappling with the moral and emotional issues that both private killing and state killing raise. In 1995, it was made into an Oscar-nominated film starring Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen and Sean Penn. In 2000, it was adapted into an opera supported by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And in 2002, it was adapted into a play. Out of her home base in Baton Rouge, Sister Helen has spent the past decades ministering to those facing execution, barnstorming the country for death penalty abolition, traveling around the world as a human rights advocate, serving families of murder victims through her group Survive, and sharing stories. On the ride from the airport, I asked her, have you always been a great storyteller? And she said, in Louisiana, we often sit around for 3 hours eating crawfish. If you're not a good storyteller, you don't get invited to parties. So we have a great storyteller here. Before I invite her on, I'd like to thank three folks here. First, thank you to the Harvard Law School Dems for co-sponsoring. Any Harvard Law School Dems here? Thank you. Two, I would like to thank the Criminal Justice Institute for spreading the word. Any Criminal Justice Institute folks here? Great. And three, I would like to thank Professor Carol Steiker. Professor Carol Steiker is here for representing the cause of death penalty moratorium so vigorously here on campus. For those of you who don't know Carol Steiker, I will say this. When that beautiful day comes when the death penalty is abolished in this country, and we tell the story of the couple dozen folks who were most influential in making that day arrive, know that two of those folks are in this room today, and it's an honor to have both of them in this room today. Without further ado, let's hear it for them. Without further ado, I present to you a member of the Congregation of St. Joseph, a winner of the Possum and Terrace Peace and Freedom Award. It's like the Nobel Peace Prize for Catholics. A global human rights advocate, one of the greatest Americans alive today, and a longtime hero of mine, Sister Helen Prejean. Good job.
Okay, y'all, we're going to make every minute count. You got to know when I leave you today, I'm going to go back to New Orleans. You know what today is in New Orleans? So I'm going to see people in all amount of array of beads and feathers and garb or non-garb flowing out of the airport out of Mardi Gras Day. Good to be here. So we want to make every minute count, because anytime there's an interaction like this between us, the people, it's where the real stuff happens to make this democracy work. And so I'll start with the fire. St. Bonaventure said, pray not for understanding, pray for the fire. And I just finished writing my memoir. It's a prequel to Dead Man Walking. It's called River of Fire. Just finished it 2 days ago to send it to the editor. And it has a prelude in it. And the prelude goes like this. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And now here's an account of how I came to be in the killing chamber that night and the spiritual currents that drew me there. This story and the fact that you even heard of it is due directly to my great Jewish editor, Jason Epstein at Random House. So here you had a Catholic nun working with these great Jewish editors at Random House for both of these books, Dead Man Walking first and then The Death of Innocence, about accompanying two innocent people to execution, and how broken this system is, and how it's inevitable that it's broken because only poor people are selected for the death penalty, almost always those who have killed white people. And a Supreme Court that has been deaf to race. And when you see the history of the Supreme Court, it's always been deaf to race, so that when Congress tried to pass something to criminalize belonging to the Ku Klux Klan, the Supreme Court wouldn't let that happen. Supreme Court upheld that there couldn't be interracial marriages. In Pace v. Virginia, upheld that. And because the Supreme Court mirrors the experience of the people, where you have mostly people, where you don't have people of color, the exception being Clarence Thomas, and I don't know how to categorize him. But at any rate, it's basically a story about waking up and getting involved. Now, I got brought right into the crucible, into the fire. I've accompanied 6 people to execution. And I've also been with victims' families and seen the futility of the promise made to them by prosecutors that if they wait 10, 15, 20 years, the justice they'll get for them is that they will get to witness as the state kills the one who killed their loved one. They get to watch that, and that's supposed to heal them. I've got to watch it close up. And I guess I'm talking particularly to the law students, to those that are studying law, or those that are journalists, those that are second removed from the actual fire of the experience. How do you catch on fire? What can catch you on fire? I mean, looking at Rosa Parks there, partly why she didn't move on the bus that day is she was just tired. She'd been working all day, and it was stupid, you know. They had all the black people crowded in there. There was no white people, and she was tired. Human factors come into things. What can set us on fire is the question of our lives. We've got one little bitty life. Andy Dillard says we have our itsy-bitsy lives with our itsy-bitsy lunches with our itsy-bitsy friends, and here we are raising tomatoes when we ought to be raising Cain or Lazarus. It's like, what are we going to do with our life? So I'll start out, and River of Fire will take you into all these little Catholic girl stories, being in an A student in a nun school, wanting to be a nun because I wanted to be a teacher, I wanted to be in education. That's been a great thing for women in the Catholic Church because you've been able to always be educated to be a nun, and you're a free agent. You get to do the work you really want to do, because you got a community of support under you. So I did my regular nun stuff. No, I did not beat kids with rulers. No, I am not the nun in the cartoon. You see this big, imposing nun, a little bitty kid writing on the blackboard. She's got the rule over the little kid's head. I am personally responsible for the agony and death of Christ. I am personally responsible. I'm not that nun. I love my kids. 7th and 8th graders, taught them English, taught them creative writing, learned it myself in the process. But I didn't get it about social justice, because for a big thing, and some people are still this way, it's charity. You're charitable of those around you. But social justice, I said, we're nuns, we're not social workers. How are we going to pick up all these social justice issues? I didn't get it. And that awakening, when that happened, sitting in a room similar to this, hearing a talk, nuns go to a lot of conferences, and I heard the words, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I go, yeah. I know what Jesus said about the poor you'll always have with you. Yeah. God loves the poor. But I mean, poor people, we've always had them in the world, right? And I'm one little person. What difference am I going to make in that? And then she said, integral to good news to poor people is that they're poor no longer. You can't just simply say it's God's will that some people are rich and some people are poor. How does it happen? You got to get in there and use your noggin. You got to start figuring things out. And then which side you're going to be on. So to just say you're neutral about it. So I live in New Orleans where there are 10 major housing projects. 10. I grew up in the days in the 40s and 50s where black people were our servants. We lived in the big house. My daddy was a successful lawyer. Ellen worked in the house with Mama. Jesse worked in the yard. They lived in the servants' quarters. They had to use their own toilet, never ate at the table with us, never questioned it. Mom and Dad were kind to Ellen and Jesse. Daddy helped Jesse get a job at the refinery, get a house, build their lives, but never questioned about what it meant as a person when you went to the Paramount Theater in Baton Rouge that you had to sit up in the crow's nest because black people couldn't sit with the white people in the regular part. Never questioned that. Couldn't see the hurt. Couldn't see the suffering. And that's what culture does. Culture blinds us. Well, honey, that's just the way we do things here. It's better for the races to be separate. Never question. So when we wake up, in faith, you can call that grace, but to wake up to some of the big issues of our day and then put our little boat on that current is a great, great gift in our lives. And you can feel the wind whistling through your hair. So coming out of that execution chamber that I described in that prelude, it was the middle of the night. They'd killed Patrick Saunier. He's the first story in here, right after midnight. They put you in a prison vehicle, take you out through the gates. Some of the sisters were waiting for me and the lawyers. All the lawyers I know are hero lawyers who have taken these cases and tried to save people's lives and had to sit there and watch as their clients were killed when they did not prevail against a very stacked system to kill their clients. All of them I know. I have never met one that is not a person of superior soul stature that genuinely cares about people and justice when in many, many instances they're going to be doomed to failure and their client is going to die. But against all odds, they strive. So when I came out, the first thing I did was I vomited. I threw up. I never watched a human being be killed. And I'm going to take into his crime. Because that was the gift of Jason Epstein for this book. Because if you don't take your reader with you and face squarely into the horror of the crime of what this man did, people are never going to read your book. They're going to say, well, she's a nun. She's a spiritual advisor to the murderer on death row. Jesus said to forgive. That nun ain't going to take us anywhere honest in this book. I ain't going to read this book. And he helped me shape the story. He said, if within the first 10 pages of this book, you don't face squarely the horror of the crime, nobody's going to read your book. And if Jason hadn't helped me shape this book, I wouldn't be standing here today. There sure wouldn't be no movie about it. And so right there, so they have the car, I get in it, but then I have to throw up, so I get out of the car for a minute. And in that moment, I had the realization, the people are never going to get close to this. It's a secret ritual. Even if you had the death penalty in Massachusetts, you'll never be close to it. Citizens will never. It's 12 little witnesses behind prison walls. But I had been brought in as a witness. And there was two things that happened simultaneously. I've been a witness, so I got to tell the story. Didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew I had to witness. Kind of like Elie Wiesel talks about the Holocaust. When you've been a witness to something, you can't just walk away from that. There's a moral imperative because you have seen it and come to understand it, that you got to be able to, you have a moral imperative to bring others into it, to help to persuade them. And the other thing was the goodness of the American people. People are good. And I've been finding out, I've been zigzagging this country back and forth. I've been in every state, talked in every possible venue you can imagine. And people are good. They've bought into, it's a very superficial acceptance of the death penalty. They're made to be afraid, oh, these criminals, now it's immigrants or terrorists or whatever. Made to be afraid, oh, yeah, we got to do that. I think the support for torture in this country right now is close to 70% for these terrorists that might be able to give you information to save a city. If you ever heard Scalia's interview with the BBC about what you can do to terrorists to get information, it makes your blood run cold. Because, see, once you turn a switch that people are not human in the way we are, once you can demonize people, you can do anything to them. And so on death row, the conditions, like in Richard Glossop in Oklahoma, it's underground. They live underground. In death row, if you need medical attention, so you need a wisdom tooth pulled. Are you kidding me? Medical care? We're going to kill you. You are so beyond the pale of humanness. And so everything then gets neglected. Once you posit you can kill somebody, you can do anything to them. And it's being removed from the suffering that then makes us callous and makes us go along with things. But if somebody can bring you in and just say, look at this. And that's what I do in Dead Man Walking. So first it was Pat Saunier writing him a letter. I just think I'm going to be writing letters. It was 82. We hadn't had an execution in Louisiana in 20 years. There'd been an unofficial moratorium on death penalty starting in the 60s, 70s. I hadn't even noticed when the Supreme Court put the death penalty back in 76. I don't follow what the Supreme Court does. And I thought I was only going to be writing to this man. You know, a little English major, send a few little poems, have a nice little correspondence. I didn't know they were going to kill him, much less that I would be there. But you put your boat in the current and you start writing, and that's what happened. So then, boy, here we are ratcheting into the last days of his life, and I'm in the death house with him and just counting down the days, his last Wednesday on earth, his last Thursday on earth, his last Friday. Can you imagine checking that off on your calendar? Here's why the death penalty will always involve torture. Because torture is an extreme mental or physical assault on someone rendered defenseless. So can you imagine a more mental assault on someone? Everybody has the same nightmare on death row. The guards are coming. It's my time. They're dragging me out of my cell. I'm kicking. I'm going, no, no. And then I wake up and I look around. I'm in the cell. Not tonight. Because human beings are imaginative and we are conscious and we anticipate. So the anticipation of dying, you die 1,000 times in your mind before you die. And then you're going to get to that moral root of it. Yeah, but look what they did. So don't they deserve that suffering? Or sometimes if you've ever been to a death penalty trial, like in the Deep South, interesting, you know, the Bible Belt and the death belt in the South are the same. A little bit here on religion. I ain't at the divinity school, we're at the law school, but religion plays a huge role in when you're going to say that you want the government to be able to have this power over the lives of individuals. If you want an easy or quick litmus test of who God is, then what you take on the death penalty. And what's the authority you think that the government has now to decide there can be some crimes for which we will decide that these people can be killed, and we'll set up a system of always getting the right one, and we'll set up the criteria, which was skewed from the start. That the Supreme Court said it had to be for the worst of the worst murders. Come on. Who knows what the Sam Hill an ordinary murder is and what it means to say and, you know, the worst of the worst, you kill my mama. Oh, but it wasn't during a felony. Oh, it wasn't in a room full of, but it's my mama. And a universe is lost that can never be replaced. Is that not in itself the worst of the worst? So the criteria doesn't hold. So what happens is culture takes over. So you have a clear pattern. The Deep South states that practice slavery do close to 70% of all the executions. Surprise? And overwhelmingly, those who have killed white people, like 75%. When white people are killed, because if the victim has no status, you're never going to be the worst of the worst. 90% of the people killed in New Orleans are people of color, by other people of color. And you think the prosecutor is ever going to go for the death penalty? If the life of a person doesn't have dignity to it, you're not going to go for the extreme, ultimate penalty and spend all that money and all that energy. It's not worth it. Negligible death. Same thing for class. Homeless person killed, you think they're going to prosecute a very valuable citizen in our city was killed last night. We're seeking the ultimate penalty for the one who dared to kill that person. It's all just embedded in us and in our values and the way we operate. What did Patrick Sonnier do? Why was he on death row? He and his brother had shot and killed 2 innocent teenage kids. It was near a sugarcane field where the kids had gone to park after a homecoming football game. And they are found near this sugarcane field, and they've both been shot in the back of the head. 3 bullet holes. Bang, 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 bang. Dead. Loretta Bork, the young woman, 18 years old, raped. God, I mean, could it be worse? So all of this happens, you know, a bit at a time for me as I get to know Pat, as I finally get the story, as I'm working with the lawyers. Too late, as it turns out, to try to make a difference in the appeals court because it was already shot. It was already gone. They would use procedural bars to keep you from getting in extra evidence. They will say things like, you should have much sooner, you should have gotten this in, but I didn't have a lawyer, I didn't have the DNA test, no matter. Procedural bars. Finality in the cases, so let's get on with it with these cases. I mean, we've even had Supreme Court justices say that defense lawyers are using guerrilla warfare to try to block justice from happening in death penalty cases. My daddy's a lawyer, and I never listened much to all that law talk, because, I mean, you can really split the hair of the hair of the hair. But boy, when I got into this, you learn the law because the people that you're with, you learn it. And so that's how I came to it. So what do you do in the face of, this is the other way that Jason Epstein really helped me in the writing of this book. Got 2 teenagers killed, 17 and 18. What happens forever to their parents and the rest of their lives? And I didn't know what to do with the victim's family. I was learning about human rights. I knew that this person should be executed. So I just said, well, I didn't know what to do with the victim's family, so I just kind of left them alone and figured we'd just get into an argument because, of course, I figured they're going to buy into what the prosecutor's telling them, that the way to show justice for your dead child is the death penalty, his death and nothing less. And if anybody disagrees with that, they're your enemy. And I thought, I'll just cause them more pain because I know I don't believe in the death penalty, but what could I possibly say to them? So I avoided them until the pardon board hearing happened in Baton Rouge a week before Pat was executed, and it's the last act. And, of course, the victims' families are there. They have filled that room with their relatives and friends. And I'm there with one lawyer, Millard Farmer, and a psychiatrist to try to say to that pardon board, don't kill this man. And that's when I met the victim's family. Couldn't be more polarized. You actually sign a book when you go into the pardon board in Louisiana, which side you're on. Literally, it breaks down to life and death right there. You sign the thing. Only 3 of us signed a little life side. Everybody else in that room on the death side. Why this man should die for what he did. And that's when I met the victim's family. And in the film, Tim Robbins got it right. The film, just to say a word about it, Susan Sarandon made that film happen. She read the book right as it came out in paperback and pestered Tim Robbins for 9 months till he broke down, read the nun's book. Probably did it for domestic tranquility, which lasted for a while with the 2 of them. But Tim made me feel good because he said it was the easiest screenplay he ever wrote because you want to bring people over to both sides. So Jason said, you got it. You can't just say I didn't know what to do with the victims' families. That was a terrible mistake. When you're writing a book, don't gloss over your mistakes. Take people into the mistakes of that you should have reached out to them. And boy, when I met him, you talk about surprise, because the Borks were furious at me. We were walking outside while the pardon board was voting, and I rounded a corner, and there they were, and the Borks were first, and they just averted their gaze, just furious. And right behind them were the boys' parents, Lloyd and Eula LeBlanc, an older couple, could never have another child. And the father, Lloyd, walked right up to me and said, Sister Helen, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. This is my wife, Eula. It's our son, David, that was killed. Sister, all this time, you've been going to visit those two brothers, and you didn't want to come see us. You can't believe the pressure we under with the death penalty. And later, I'm going to learn from him what that meant. And pressure, I go, pressure? He just goes, Sister, everybody was saying to me, Lloyd, they kill your boy. If you're not for the death penalty, it looks like you didn't love David. You got to be for the death penalty. And he said, that's all I heard. I had nobody to talk to that would say anything different to me. And deep in my heart, I know that's not what Jesus taught. I know that's not really who I am. But you got all those people saying that at you. And I didn't have you or anybody to talk to. So I was so wrong in that. So I would go visit this man, go pray with him in this little chapel. And that story's in here, of course. He's the hero of this book, because he's the first one who really helped me understand and took me through his own journey. He said, Sister, everybody thinks forgiveness is weak. Oh, you kill my son, well, I'll forgive you. Like, oh, well, I condone you kill my son, it's okay. He said, weak. He said, here's how I see it. He said, when David was killed, this beautiful boy, I almost lost Eula, my wife. We had to move David's cemetery so it could be close to Eula's, because she can't make it through a day without visiting her boy's grave. And he said, I was so filled with that anger and that rage of how I wanted to kill him. But then I'm snapping at Eula and angry all the time. It's eating me up, eat me alive at Vicky, our daughter. And he did his hand like this when he said this. And he said, then I said, they kill my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to go in another path. You think even of the word forgive, to give before, and not to let the power of love to be overcome by hatred. I have met these human beings in this country. Bud Welch, whose daughter Julie was killed in Oklahoma City bombing, same thing of not letting the hatred consume them and choosing another path where they stay in wholeness and in love. They are teaching us. They are one of the factors that are helping us put the death penalty down. So New Jersey, 10 years ago, 62 murder victims' families testified before the legislative body saying, don't kill for us. The death penalty re-victimizes us. We're given a promise, 10, 15 years, we'll get to watch as the person's executed, then there's another appeal, there's a twist in the case, we wait and wait in this holding pattern. How are we supposed to heal? How are we supposed to move on in our life? Waiting for this so-called justice. Don't kill for us. And they help. They help the New Jersey legislature. The other voice that's really beginning to help us also are the testimony of wardens and guards have had to do the killing for us. Ever think what happens to those people whose job it is one night to take a live person out of that holding cell and walk them down that hall, strap them in that chair or on that gurney, and be a part of the killing of a fellow human being? Ever think what happens to the jurors who go behind those closed doors and you got to have a unanimous verdict? I mean, I tell the story in Death of Innocence. That tells about two people, Dobie Gillis Williams in Louisiana, IQ 65. Atkins happened 2 years after Dobie was executed. Could have saved his life. And Joseph Odell in Virginia. Two innocent people, and how the broken system how it works. I just have keep learning, you know. We got to learn as we go. And then in this book, I take you into the brokenness of the system and how you got to watch people die anyway. But I also tell the story of the anguished juror in here. And it was about the execution of Robert Sawyer in Louisiana. Robert Sawyer had real brain damage. Robert Sawyer, you could tell, was not completely with you. I mean, he was all over the place. So this guy gets in, and he said, you know, I thought being on a jury was like a democracy and all. You'd discuss things, you know, and, you know, persuade each other. So he said, we got in there for Robert Sawyer. There was no problem finding him guilty. But he said, we get in there. So the foreman says, now let's see where we are in this. Let's do a little straw vote here. Which way everybody's leaning? So they went around the table. Death, 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 death. Get to this jury. And he says, hey, let the guy live. I mean, you know, we're going to still be protected. It's not like we got to kill him. And he said, sister, they came down on me. Well, you can handle it. I mean, the language was like shit on a shingle. They came down on me, and I said, this is not going to be a democratic little conversation. It was pure pressure. And he said, I gave in. And the night Robert Sawyer was executed, he called Nick Trentacosta, the lawyer who had represented Robert Sawyer. He's drunk, and he's crying, and he said, Nick, I tell my son, never cave in to what you think is right. So we think these jurors are in there, and people want to go home. They're saying, come on, and pressure. We give in to pressure. Everybody, I mean, of course, you would never know that in Harvard Law School or anything about pressure or any little forces or eddies in the river or currents. But pressures, we succumb to pressure as human beings because we're very social people. And so ever think what happens to the jurors? So now we have all of this now over 30 years. We've been killing people. And then you get into the whole thing of the lethal injection, the masking of death. So we started out hanging people, but then you got to watch when you hang people because if they wait too much, the head falls off, and that looks bad. That's cruelty, so you got to watch the hanging thing. There is a guy who was on death row in Washington State who purposely, he studied it, the physics of it, how much weight he had to gain, so that he knew that if they hung him, his head would fall off. And so he gained weight. Wait, don't tell me. Wait. And he won. He prevailed. You could choose hanging. He chose hanging. He was overweight, said be cruel and unusual punishment, saved you. Now, he was on Weight Watchers the rest of his life on death row. But, I mean, you get into all of these crazy things. So you move from hanging, electrocution will be quick, and then people catching on fire like Jesse Tafara in Florida in the electric chair. You catch on fire, a lot of things go wrong, right? Lethal injection. Let's make it medicinal. We're just putting people to sleep. And then the company in Denmark that made the main drug they were using for executions, they find out that drug, which is supposed to be used in anesthesia for surgery, was being used to kill people, and they cut off the drug. So now the Supreme Court of the United States has been allowing states to just experiment, mix together different drugs to kill people. Well, let's try a little bit more about Dazolam. Well, it's not really an anesthetic, it's a sedative. Well, let's throw 500 times. That ought to do something. That ought to put a person under. Because the key thing with this is that a person has to be under enough that when that potassium chloride, which is like fire or acid in your veins to stop your heart, when that hits, the pain is so great. And if you're not deeply under, you can experience the pain of that. We're trying to do this in a humane way, right? That we kill people humanely in the United States. Even the word execution is a euphemism. You execute a business plan or a forward pass. But we execute human beings, right? So when I got brought into it, and that night, after midnight, after Pat, that's what really launched me into it. And so you just start working. You just start, so you learn. But I got to meet lawyers who taught me. I got to meet people from the ACLU and Amnesty that taught me about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that was a conversation with my church, because the Catholic Church in the Catechism and in its teachings said that the state had the right to take life. And when you have that fundamental principle, that you're going to allow governments to decide that some of their citizens can be killed, then you turn everything over to them. What'll be your criteria? How are you going to do it? The whole bit. And so in this book also is the dialogue that I got to have directly with Pope John Paul about the Catholic teaching. And I said, isn't it interesting? All these Catholics who say they're pro-life, which means they're against abortion, but they fought a death penalty. You know what it boils down to? Pro-innocent life. And the Catechism keeps talking about the dignity of innocent life. Well, when I'm walking with somebody to execution, and they shackled hand and foot, and it's Pat Sonier, and he said, Sister, just pray God holds up my legs. He's been rendered completely defenseless, and he's being taken out to be killed. Where is the dignity in this death? And morally, that's really where it crossed the line in Catholic social and moral teaching. Because for self-defense, that's one thing to kill another human being, but it could be for self-defense or the defense of society. But when you got prisons, and then you render a person completely defenseless and then kill them, how do you call that defense? It's their defenselessness that makes it a different moral reality. And that was the conversation with Pope John Paul. So it began, you don't just change a pope's mind and then the whole church falls in, right? I mean, you can't get away from dialogue with the people. And Vatican II and the Catholic Church said, hey, the people are the church. We always thought it was the bishops and the hierarchy and all, because that's who's always in the news. And when you hear people mad, they go, the church. Do you know what the church did? I said, you mean the bishops? I mean, who you mean when you say the church? It's the people, you get to the people. Democracy, death penalty, you get to the people. So I wrote this book, and it hit. It was a true book, because I had help. And I take you over to both sides of the victim's family and the one being who did the crime. And what's great about the opera, I was just in Madrid, Spain, and the Opera of Dead Man Walking swept the country. Something happened in Spain. I think it's because they've suffered so much in Spain from the Civil War, you know, under Franco. Their human rights are big in Spain. And the Opera of Dead Man Walking is very, very powerful. It's strong. It's got good music. Terrence McNally was the playwright that did the libretto. And so we're going to follow up with that, because Tim's written a play. We're going to get it translated into Spanish to get to the young people, because all you do is substitute the word terrorist for murderer, and we got the same dynamic going. People are made to be afraid. Well, we have a right to kill these people. And so all of that has helped the dynamic. The arts are very, very, as I learned, very important. So the one thing I learned about doing a contract with somebody who wants to do a movie in your book is you got to trust them. And Susan Sarandon had read Dead Man Walking. She's the one who called me on the phone because she had to come to New Orleans. She was filming The Client, one of the Grisham movies. A lot of his movies ended with people leaving from airports, some of the early movies. So she had to come to New Orleans. She calls me. Sister Helen, I want to meet you. I read your book. I want to meet you. So I didn't know what the lady looked like. So we rented Thelma and Louise. I mean, a bunch of... I was mixed up. I thought she was Gina Davis in the whole movie. And I'm going, oh, man. And sisters are going, Helen, that she would be you in the movie? I go, oh, I don't know. So it's a Bon Ton restaurant, really good Cajun restaurant, good one to go to if you go to... And so I was there waiting for Susan to come in. I go, oh, thank God she's Louise. She walked in the restaurant. And only much later, after I got to know her, did I tell her this story. We sat at a table, and she said, here's why we need a new kind of film on the death penalty. All the other films have been kind of formulaic. The whole thing was, did the person do it or not? Terrible crime, okay. Oh, you find out they did it, they're guilty. Justice done, ends with the execution. Movie ends, reflection ends. She said, we got to go much deeper than that, of taking the American people into this. Granted, they do terrible crimes. Granted, in some books of justice, maybe you say they should be killed. But what about us? It's about us. How are we going to respond? How can we bring people deeply into this? Dead Man Walking changed the way films were done about the death penalty, if you trace it afterwards. Green Mile, all that came afterwards. And Tim was a genius in the way he put it together. He was an honest, bold filmmaker who wasn't afraid to take people deeply into the journey of it. So you had the film, and I remember being in Tim's office when he was editing the film, and I said, Tim, how are we going to get a lot of people to want to come to see our film? Of course, what do I know? And he goes, well, we're banking on some nominations for the Academy Awards. I said, wow, Tim, that's a long shot, huh? He goes, Helen, the whole thing is a long shot. And I knew the book had been a long shot. And I said, okay. So the night of the Academy Awards, Whoopi Goldberg is the MC that night. We got 4 nominations. Tim was nominated, Sean Penn was nominated, Susan was nominated and got it. She'd been nominated 4 other times. And Bruce Springsteen got to sing Dead Man Walking, the title song, you know. Tim also did an album while he was doing the film. He says, I must be crazy. Here I am, and he got Johnny Cash, and he got Tom Waits, and these people that do original songs after looking at a rough cut of it. So Bruce Springsteen gets up to sing Dead Man Walking, and Whoopi Goldberg was introduced, you know. She doesn't use any of those little cards, those cue cards. She just flies. She just says whatever she wants. And so she said, Bruce, first you do the Tom Joad series about the jobless people and the down-and-out people. Now, Bruce, you're doing a song about a man on death row. Bruce, you got to lighten up. And so it happened, and Susan gets the Academy Award, and I was in Japan 6 weeks later, and the taxi cab driver was going, Dead Man Walking. It got into the vernacular. They had a cartoon in New Yorker not long after the whole thing happened of a husband making his way early in the morning to get his cup of coffee, and there's his wife on the couch talking to a friend going, Dead Man Walking. You know, a baseball team doing bad, dead men walking. It just got into the vernacular. It's all a gift. All we do is we just do our part, and we put it out there. And trust that arc, that moral arc of the universe to take it, if it's true and it's good. And as Gandhi said, you don't do it seeking the success. You do it because integrity demands that you do it, and because you can know the suffering that's going on and the injustice, and to find a way to use our gifts to get it out there, to persuade our fellow citizens that things need to be different. And as low as things can feel sometimes, that it seems all bleak and dark, we have to trust that spark. We have to trust that fire in ourselves, to know the good, to seek after it, and then to put our gift in there. And really important, I believe, is we have to associate with people of like mind, because Lone Rangers don't make it long in social justice. We have to be in a community of people who help keep blowing on the coals to ignite that flame in us, and who teach us things, who help us keep learning and point us in directions to keep learning. All these things, I think. And I'm going to tell you, it's the greatest adventure of our lives, to be part of something, even if we don't absolutely get to see the success of it. It bends the arc, helps bend it forward to a day where people are not going to be subjected to the terror and the of being executed, of having their lives ended in a way that should never happen. We are not worthy of the death penalty. And my hope has only been bolstered in the thousands and thousands of American people. When you bring them through it, help people stand before the outrage of terrible acts that happen, but then move into, now what are we going to do about it? And then tell the stories of the people closest to it and how it affects them. People do respond. What most people say is, I didn't know it was like that. And then the power of a book, because when you read a book, you're quiet. It's like you're on retreat. It's like you're meditating. You're not debating. And you're moving into the book and the story. And Jason helped me with that too. Because he said, Helen, you put all your information about race in the death penalty, poverty in the death penalty, you put it all in footnotes. Well, your scholars going to read your footnotes. But the art of good writing, people are going to read for story, but then you shingle in all the important things you want them to know so that by the time they close this book, they will be exposed to the most important facts that they need to know about the death penalty. People have pitiful, scant knowledge about how the death penalty really works. They get caught in the rhetoric of it, the terribleness of the crime, and don't think further. And that's why we write books, or we write articles, or we enter into debates and into public forum to explore the ideas, to go deeper. And so I want to encourage you not to be afraid to do that, to be bold, and to get in there. But you got to know your stuff. You got to learn your stuff. And then you learn from each other how to put it out there, and you keep going. And the energy comes back to you. Maybe that's why I use the image of a river, because, you know, I might have been tired flying on Cape Air from this little hole in the ground, Augusta, Maine, to come to you today. But boy, you hit this room, you meet Pete. And of course, they get pizza for you. So, I mean, you know, that's energy right there. And so let's use the rest of the time we have just to have a conversation together. And I'd love for you to get the books. I'd love to sign them for you, because you read the book and it'll bring you somewhere. Thank you. Can I have my coat? Thank you. Okay, come on, what you want to talk about? Anybody? Comment, question? Yes.
You mentioned jurors, you mentioned panel members. Have you had any same experience with judges that
Some judges, yeah. Some judges where one of the defense lawyers, where was this, up in Delaware, gave the judge, dead man walking to read. It changed his perspective. See, because when we're reading story, I mean, they teaching that in law school now, huh? The one who tells the whole story wins the case. You know, the role of mitigation in all the cases. So the story, our imaginations are involved, and it enables us, see, what you're moving for is empathy, the capacity to identify even with a human being who seems beyond the pale. And then jurors who are making the actually life and death decision of whether or not they'll participate in the killing of a fellow citizen. There are just a lot of things that are present in it, where story. In this, the story of Jeremy Gross, who killed a convenience store owner. It's all on the video. You see him going in. The convenience store owner's being shot, going, why, Jeremy, why? And you see the person struggling toward the phone to try to get help and dying in a pool of blood. Well, Bob Hill, who was a defense lawyer for Jeremy Gross, this happened in Indiana, he showed the video because he knew the prosecution was going to show it. And then when you came to the sentencing part of the trial, where you decide death or life, he said, we all saw what Jeremy Gross did when he walked into the convenience store that day. And now let me tell you the story of Jeremy Gross before he got to the convenience store that day. And here was the story of a kid with very, very abusive parents, put in a foster home for a while where he ate family meals, his grades picked up, he belonged to Little League Baseball. Give the kid half a chance and the kid will live. And they did. They voted unanimously for Jeremy Gross to live because of Bob Hill It took him like 20 phone calls and visits to Jeremy's mother. It takes a lot for a mother to, under oath, to get before a group of people and say, I abused my child. It takes a lot. And Bob Hill. And I began to see what the defense lawyers could do. So telling story is the way to win a case. Denny LaBeouf, who is one of the lawyers working with the ACLU John Adams Project in Guantanamo, said the most vulnerable person going into trial is someone who's actually innocent. Because they go, well, I know I'm innocent. When I get to tell my story, you know, they'll get it. And they don't know what the prosecution's going to do to keep their scenario, their narrative, from coming out. And again, pressure, running for office. Actually, in the Deep South states like Louisiana, the prosecutors backroom awards called the Louisiana Prick Award they give each other when they get a death penalty. It's terrible. I know, we laughing because of the prick thing. But it shows the state bird, the Louisiana pelican, flying with a hypodermic needle in its talons. And, hey, you got any awards? Yeah, I got 3 of them. You want to see them? Means they got 3 death penalties. And you actually hear people bragging when they run for office. So you got to look at culture and how this thing actually works and who prizes the death penalty. And we come now to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who pestered them at the Kennedy Center to do the opera of Dead Man Walking. Pestered them for several years. And so I was there with her when they did Dead Man Walking 2 years ago. And she said, and you could see it beginning to happen in the arguments of the court. So when something's law, it needs to be predictable to some extent. It can't be like being hit by lightning, right? And so you have the criteria, worst of the worst. But what she was saying, the great RBG said to me was, like last year, it's just a few pockets of overzealous prosecutors responsible for 65, 70% of all the death penalties. So when you see such disproportionate pockets of application in one place and not in others, there's no way you can call this equal justice under law. She believes that is finally what will be the constitutional argument that'll bring it down. Please God, may that day come soon. Somebody else. Yes.
I mean, what advice do you have to us as aspiring attorneys that one day we are going to go into a system that, as you said, is deaf to race? What can we do as just sort of like individual parts of that system to change that, to make it clear that race is something that we need to talk about, and if anywhere in the legal system, because it's quite literally a matter of life or death.
Yeah, what's the word you're using? Are you talking about rape cases?
Oh, sorry, race.
Oh, race. Oh, God, race. Race. You know, you have to really enlist to see patterns. Look how long it took, like McCleskey, where they clearly showed the pattern of why prosecutors never wanted to have black people on the jury. And they would use arguments like, oh, he had a beard, or anything but saying he's a black man and we don't want him on the jury. But we have been making some progress on that. A lot of times when there's a paper trail and you absolutely see in there, get him off, get black people off. And so you have to really know your stuff, and you have to see patterns in things. And the main thing is, whenever you have a chance, you want to make sure in the voir dire when you're choosing the jury. I think they've done studies to say if it's only one black person, they can't prevail. And it may be that even with just 2, they can't prevail. But if you have at least 3, they can prevail and make a difference because they get overpowered. So up front, as much as possible. And the other thing, too, is to try to do ahead of time to get all the mitigation of things and the patterns ahead of things so that they won't even bring it to trial. Because finally, it is a prosecutor's decision to go for the death penalty or not. But there's just so much. I mean, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, the mass incarceration of people of color. I mean, more than happened during apartheid in South Africa because they made drugs a felony instead of a misdemeanor. And so then, and of course, many, many more white people and people of color do drugs, but look and see who gets massively incarcerated. There's race in practice. So my state, Louisiana, you know, the U.S. incarcerates more than any other country. My state incarcerates than any other state. And it comes right out of the legacy of slavery. We got to understand the legacy of slavery and how it works. You know, even what were slave owners going to do to get the workers when you free the slaves? So what do? You start arresting people of color for anything, loitering, whatever, and you send them to jail. So then they're in jail, and then they go, well, look, I served my time. Oh, you owe us for room and board in jail, so we're going to put you on this work form to pay that off. And they stayed in servitude. Slavery by any other name. Good book written on that. And so it just has gone on, but nothing like waking up and getting your stuff and going in there with your head up, and also knowing that you're not always going to go in and you're going to prevail and you're going to win. It's a big thing to be willing along the way to do your best in it and to show dignity to your client. Sometimes the lawyer is the only dignity they have, is a lawyer by their side who stands with them and stands for their dignity. And listen to people like Brian Stevenson and hear his stories about how it all works.
Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we got for today.
Thank you.